Welcome in everyone and good morning. It's HogvilleNET YouTube Live. I'm Kevin McPherson. We've got several things to get into today. We're going to go recruiting. We're also going to take a look at some tidbits, just some odds and ends lately with some stuff that surrounding Razorback basketball as we're really on the eve of the football season for Razorback fans. Here in my hometown, Arkansas, we'll play in-state D1 Arkansas Pine Bluff. Tomorrow, Thursday at War Memorial Stadium here in the 501. I'll be part of Hogville's coverage for that, by the way. But there's still plenty to talk about basketball. Again, recruiting is one of those. And we're also going to get into some other stuff, including some of the schedule stuff. Since we were last on about a week ago, I guess it was Wednesday of last week, Arkansas announced a game against Baylor. In addition to last week, just a few days prior to that, the SEC schedule coming out. We knew the 18 game matchups, but we also got the playing dates. We talked about that on the last segment. We didn't get to talk about that Baylor game, so we're going to do that. So we're going to jump around, but we're going to always, like we always do, we're going to start with recruiting. I think that's, to me, still very important. We look at class of 2025 because we're really getting ramped up. Remember, Arkansas is the first team in the country with a pledge, a 5-star pledge that's a top 10 rated player. Kevin, who do you think we ultimately get in this class? We're going to get into some of that. I may go into some of my thoughts on that. I actually have already players I've mentioned, but it starts with Darius Acuff Jr., the 6'3" guard out of Detroit, point guard, lead guard. I think he could be a combo guard. I'll talk a little bit about that too, but I think he, similar to a DJ Wagner and a Boogie Fland, you'll see him a lot on the ball in his minutes, but I think there are opportunities for him to play alongside another lead guard because of his ability to score and do other things playing off the ball. But Darius Acuff Jr. is 247 Sports has him ranked the fourth player in the country, number 4 in a loaded 2025 class. I talk about all the time. But about a month ago, I mean, it was late July when he committed to Arkansas, right after the Peach Jam, the Nike Peach Jam. But it was interesting because we also learned since we were last on, and I told you guys, I've been saying for a while, that I had a source telling me Malik Thomas was looking at dates in both September and October to visit. And I kept saying, once we heard of the Koa Pete news, another 2025 5-star 6'7", 6'8" combo forward out of Arizona, once we heard the news that he was going to visit that middle weekend in September, the 13th through the 15th, it's the only home game in Fayetteville where you could have visitors for football in the month of September against Alabama, Birmingham. I mentioned, and I've said it multiple times here, don't be surprised when Arkansas has multiple visitors in that weekend. And I mentioned that I had some of the names on that, but there was also possibility that some of that got pushed out to October, and they were trying to get the puzzle pieces to settle in. And so some of it was a little tentative. Well, we learned, I think the day or 2 days after I came on last week and mentioned Malik Thomas, keep an eye on that weekend for him. Sure enough, that's the weekend Malik Thomas is going to visit. 5-star guard, 6'4" out of Pittsburgh, another top 10 rated 5-star player. When you look at numbers, I think he's in the composite rankings, the 6th overall player for that class. And he was a guy that was going to visit Arkansas back in late June. As just following his visit to UConn, he postponed that visit. He reached out to me and said he wasn't going to make it. I reported that. And then it was just a swarm of national media jumping out with predictions that he was going to go to UConn. I fell into it with the idea that that's probably the leader there and most likely scenario. And I had a source or two that felt like, hey, this is probably what's going to happen. But no one said definitively. And so it turns out it was a postponement because now he is actually scheduled and it's public knowledge. So now we have public knowledge, even though behind the scenes I've been getting this stuff and maybe not with 100% certainty, but close to it. But so we've got Koa Pete, composite number 5 player in the country. I'm just mentioned 6'7", 6'8" combo forward out of Arizona. And now Malik Thomas, the 6'4" guard out of Pittsburgh. He'll play at Overtime Elite next year. 2 5-stars hovering around that top 5. And you've already got Darius Acuff Jr., a top 5 player. So those guys are coming in September 13th to the 15th. There's at least one more who I think is still on a trajectory for that weekend. We'll see. I'm going to talk more about that when we move along. But I want to talk about Malik Thomas a little bit because when we go back to that June postponement, if you remember, Darius Acuff Jr. had not committed to Arkansas yet. There was momentum for that, and it was thought that this is probably maybe where he's going to go. Was Arkansas, and I kept saying he was the leader. Others did too. It wasn't just me. But remember, Acuff Jr. visited in early May, May 10th, and he was on campus the same weekend for a visit that DJ Wagner, the Arkansas freshman guard, was in on his visits. He had multiple visitors on that weekend. That's the only visit weekend so far when you're talking high school players to this point. I mean, that's back in May, and we're going to be in mid-September before we see Pete and Thomas on campus. But why I go back to that is at the timing with Thomas doing his postponing, we thought it might be a cancellation, but that was he told me he was postponing it, which is what he did. The visit to Arkansas coming off that UConn visit, even though Acuff wasn't committed to Arkansas yet, there was a lot of smoke that, that was inevitable. Let's not forget, Arkansas didn't get Darius Acuff Jr.'s last visit. That was UConn. He actually visited UConn in June as well. He took a visit there. So, that's something to remember that, if you're thinking, well, when we start talking about some of these upcoming visits, Arkansas may not be the last one on the list, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything. But jumping back to Thomas, it was really, I think, mid-July-ish when I reported that I was told that Darius Acuff Jr. had finally gone ahead and made a private commitment to John Calipari. And so I reported that. I don't think anybody else did, but I did. And then I also reported that I had a source that said he's going to make his announcement right after Peach Jam, sometime after Peach Jam soon. And that's what happened. We speculated it would be late July, maybe early August. It was late July. So that's the chronology of things. But what was so interesting about all that buildup, and the reason I'm going back over all that territory, is because this has been like a 4-team situation when you talk about several of these top 10 rated guards. Darius Acuff Jr., there's 5 of them that there are 4 teams that have kind of been, you hear their name prominently with 4 teams and 5 different top 10-ish rated 5-star guards. And you had Darius Acuff as one of those. Malik Thomas, who both of those names we mentioned. Darren Peterson, rated 3rd overall, really the top rated guard when you look at most of the polls, most of the rankings. Caden Lewis, who's not a top 10 guy, but he is some people think he should be. Some people think he's the best guard in the country. And then Jasper Johnson, another guy that in most services maybe outside the top 10 or 10 or 11, he's right there. But these are the guys that were in play when you start talking about Arkansas, Kansas, UConn, and Alabama. And I'm going to explain why that matters. We go all the way back to Acuff. It was thought, well, maybe Kansas was going to be in the mix. Then Arkansas pulled ahead. Then there was thought, well, maybe he's going to pay attention to what Darren Peterson does, make sure that he commits to Kansas, and then Acuff off to Arkansas. Well, it got to a point where it didn't matter what Peterson was going to do. I still think it's going to be Kansas for him. He's got a visit coming up this weekend. I think Ohio State's in the picture. He visited USC. I still think ultimately Darren Peterson goes to Kansas. Why does that matter? Because Kansas was also in the mix for Malik Thomas. And Kansas and Kansas State are both in Malik Thomas's final 7. But here's where it gets interesting with UConn and Alabama and even Kentucky. So 5 teams, not including Arkansas. 5 teams, including Arkansas, only 4 when you take Arkansas, just set it aside. But I think with UConn, Malik Thomas, because of all that momentum and that visit and the thought that he was going to commit there, it didn't happen. UConn's also been heavily involved with Caden Lewis, as has Kentucky and Alabama. So it's kind of like a shell game, and you wonder where the pieces are going to land. Jasper Johnson, Arkansas, Alabama, and Kentucky were in his final 5. He never visited Arkansas. I didn't put a lot of emphasis on him because I wasn't even hearing about an upcoming visit. He could be making a decision any day now. But there's some momentum. It was thought that he's an in-state Kentucky guy. He's going to play at overtime elite. There was thought for a while he may commit somewhere out of state, North Carolina or Alabama. But it ended up being that it seemed like maybe more and more it would be Alabama. And now it's shifted towards Kentucky. This is why it's important going back to Malik Thomas, because if in fact that's where Jasper Johnson goes and that's where the safe money is right now that he will stay in state and play at Kentucky, that means Bama's still in the market for a top level guard. And Malik Thomas has not only got a visit scheduled to Arkansas September 13th, 15th, but he'll also visit 2 weeks later Alabama. I did not have Alabama on my bingo card in terms of a final 2 or 3 necessarily for Malik Thomas, but that could be shifting. I'm not saying it is. I still think it's Arkansas. The last time I was on, I said to me, if it's still coming down to Arkansas and UConn, I won't be surprised if Alabama doesn't move up simply because he's scheduled to visit there. Maybe he takes more visits in October. We don't have that news yet if he is, and it may be much ado about nothing, but it does look like Jasper Johnson's moving away from Bama. And then UConn, I've told you guys this, I've got a source telling me that have been able to match some of the NIL money, talking to guys like a Caden Lewis and maybe Malik Thomas. I've got more than one source on that, actually. One source and a media person. So that's an interesting thing as well, because UConn's going to get players. They got Liam McNeely out of last year's class, who got wiggled out of that Indiana commitment and signing. Arkansas, Calipari was trying to get in the mix with him, class of 2024, McDonald's All-America, end up going to UConn. So UConn, it's not like they don't have NIL money. It just sounds like maybe the initial offerings aren't in line, from what I'm told, with what some of these other schools are offering some of these players. So I'm kind of jumping around and darting around only to say Malik Thomas is still in a rotation of guys like Darren Peterson, Caden Lewis, and for now, Jasper Johnson. I think Johnson may settle things here. I think maybe he's going to Kentucky. And then you look at Bama, UConn, and Arkansas for ACUF. You look at Bama, UConn, and some others maybe still trying to wedge in. Kentucky was in there for a while for Caden Lewis. And I do think Darren Peterson, when the dust settles, ends up at Kansas. So I wanted to go back through the rotations of schools and how I've seen kind of the momentum for each, and then lack of it on some of these guys. And it's always the same handful of teams on these handful of top-rated guards. It seems to me. So we'll see if there are any surprises in teams I didn't mention there. But when I go back to Malik Thomas, I've always said this, I'm going way back, multiple episodes ago, and I repeat a lot. I think he would be a compliment to Darius Acuff Jr. When the thought was these guys would all find a different landing spot and not compete for roles and primary handler and primary scorer, I still think Malik Thomas is a more natural 2. I think he could be a combo guy, and you could run some ISO through him, situational basketball, but I do see Acuff as more of a lead guard, and I think those 2 guys would complement each other. I'm going to have some more talking points here in a little bit about how this staff looks at this recruiting picture. And it really, if you go back in time and look at what Calipari did at Kentucky, even Memphis before that, some of it will make sense on how he's recruited before. Some of this we've talked about a little bit, but I'm going to give maybe a bigger overview when we move along here. All right, 13 minutes in, 15 minutes in. Thank you for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. We're moving right along. I didn't ask everybody to go hit share, like, subscribe, whatever. Subscribe, like, that helps us. We appreciate that if you do it. So just moving down the list here, I do think, with Koa Pete, going to jump back to that since he's also visiting. It's publicly known that weekend. I still think it's probably Arizona, the team to beat there. But when Calipari gets players on campus, there's relationships there already. He's not going through motions and getting guys on campus to draw attention to the program. He's the attention getter. He's already a blue blood as a coach. And to me, players are not invited on campus unless he thinks he's got a real shot at sealing the deal. So I put nothing past him. I think obviously Arkansas's got the NIL pull and punch to land their share of these type of players. They did it in this last the first recruiting class for 2024, when you looked at portal, the high school guys, all that, top 9 players. And so you're building that next top 9. And I think this class is so deep. It's why we're hearing so many different names. I'm not saying Arkansas is going to get all these guys. I just mentioned Arizona might be the team to beat for Koa Pete, but I do think Arkansas is in great shape with Malik Thomas. And I'm not going to go so far as to say we're not at a point yet with any of the names I'm going to talk about today, some I've already talked about, where we're getting close to suggesting there's a silent commit. No, we're not there yet. When it got to that point with players on the first roster built, I came on here and told you it hasn't gone public yet. There have been procedural things that have happened. These guys are on board. It's going to happen. And then it did. Same thing I did with Darius Acuff Jr. A week or two before the public thing went public, I told you that source told me he's already made the private commitment now. It's just now about timing on making it public. That's what happened. We're not there yet with some of these guys, but I think with Malik Thomas, Arkansas is in great shape there. Koa Pete again. Let's see what Calipari does and is able to accomplish on that visit. He's got other visits, by the way. One of those, I think, is Arizona State. In-state school will happen this weekend. Some names we're going to talk about next will also be taking visits this weekend. So we keep an eye on all that. So let's jump now to the third guy. We talked about him last week on this segment, Chris Sinak Jr. I've talked about him a lot, but last week specifically, the 6'10 forward center out of the Baton Rouge, New Orleans area, plays at Link Academy. He'll be at Link Academy this coming season in Branson, Missouri, right down the street from Fayetteville. Going to be easy for him just to come down the street, come down a little ways and take a visit. But I had mentioned last week when I was talking about those multiple visitors, I keep hinting there could be multiple visitors that weekend of September 13th, 15th. He was one of the ones that was looking at that date and maybe some later dates at Arkansas. And last week I said he wants to visit Arkansas. LSU right now looks to be the leader. Kentucky's in the mix. Some other schools in his top 12. He's got like 7 SEC schools, and then some Big 12 school, at least one or two there. But to keep an eye on Darius Acuff Jr. or excuse me, Chris Sinak Jr. because he was wanting to visit Arkansas. So that's what I left you with. About a day or two later, after we did that segment, I went ahead. My source went ahead and gave me the green light because I was starting to hear it circulate with a couple of media members behind the scenes. Went ahead and greenlighted me for he's settling on that same weekend. Not settling, but picking that weekend, September 13th through 15th. So I put that out. Then I had a media member, a national media member that reached out to him and asked him about visit dates after seeing my tweet. And Chris Sinak Jr. replied, I haven't set any visits yet. So this media member, national media member, forwarded that to me, engaged with me. And I'm like, man, my source is reliable on this. Now, he was looking at other dates. Maybe it's still, a couple of things came to mind. Either it's still tentative, and that's probably when he's going to do it, but he hasn't 100% made a decision, or he wants to release it a certain way, and he's not ready for that stuff to get out, and it just got out. And that's why he said, I haven't set dates yet. Now, I will say this as a lead up to today, just checking on it again late last night, no one in his camp has confirmed or denied the visit date, only that he hasn't released them yet. So when pressed and pushed by various media members that I'm talking to, there's been I'm not visiting that weekend. There's not even really been an answer. It's just been radio silent. So it could mean that he is coming in and he wants it kept stealth. I've not seen a visit list released for him, but I will tell you today, Brandon Jenkins of 247 Sports reported that Chris Sinak Jr. will be on the campus of Houston this weekend for a visit. So in this instance, that comes out just a couple of days before the visit happens. So maybe he's going to drop, slow release each one during the week of. I don't know. But I'm still on board with September 13th through 15th for Chris Sinak Jr. in terms of what my source told me, because there's nothing else out there that says, A, that's not happening, or B, that there's another date that's specific to it's not going to be that weekend. Not yet. Now, he was looking at other weekends again for an Arkansas visit. Again, I still think maybe some other teams are the lead there. But if he's going to come to campus, I was told he wanted to visit, then I was given green light for the date. If he gets on campus, it's another one of those things with John Calipari. He's the best recruiter of all time. And if you get him in, there's a plan there. Calipari's not, he's just not the kind of guy, the recruiter that brings in as many, throw it against the wall and see what sticks. He is very good at driving his brand. And I think when he brings players on campus, it's only when both sides are very, very serious about Arkansas being the landing spot. Not that he wins them all, but I think with him, the recruiting's just that much better than most. And so I don't think they're coming in unless he feels like he can get them. So again, Chris Sinak Jr. would be, if you get him on campus, if that visit date is realized, or if it's even at a later time, the same thing applies. But for now, Arkansas, in my opinion, is getting 3 players that weekend that are 5-star guys. Chris Knack Jr. was a guy that was outside the top 50 for a long time. Then he had a huge spring. Then you going into June, he had the big MVP performance at the NBPA Top 100 camp in Orlando. John Calipari and several staff members were there. And he got an Arkansas offer shortly after that. His recruiting really blew up. He's now a top 10. You look at 1 or 2 services, he's hovering around that top 5, and he's a 5-star status there with Chris Sinak Jr. So as many as 3, for sure 2 that we know about publicly. Chris Sinak Jr. We'll see how it plays out in that same weekend if he visits then or later. Or, Malachi Marino put out a list of his top schools, final schools. Arkansas was on it. He let it get out that he was going to visit October 4th. Then that quickly got squelched. I came back on and I was told it's not going to happen. Not that it was ambiguous, that it wasn't going to happen. I reported that to you guys. Sure enough, never visited Arkansas, then committed to Kentucky. Came down to Kentucky and Indiana. So could the Sinak situation, which I brought up last time we were on, could it turn into one of those? Yeah, Arkansas's on the list. There's talk of a visit. Now we got a visit date. Now they're not acknowledging it. There's all kinds of things maybe that could happen there. So keep an eye on it. And then I wanted to talk about, there's really not a whole lot new on Caleb Wilson. I've been saying for a while, I think Arkansas is the leader there. Again, I'm saying there's nobody in this batch of players that I would say is a silent commitment. I wouldn't go that far. Caleb Wilson, I felt like Arkansas is the leader. I said if he had to make a decision in real time now or a few weeks ago, I started saying it would be Arkansas. I think Arkansas, again, is at the top of the list. There are some other teams in play here. When I talked last time we were on, I talked to a source that's close to his camp, and that someone that's a part of the decision-making process in his camp just continually sings the praises, has for over a year, of John Calipari and the belief he builds and what he can do for the player. Not just what he's done for other players, but how he builds belief as he goes with each person he's recruiting and what he can do for them. All right. So that was the positive spin last week. Some other things I have looked at since that time with Caleb Wilson. I wanted to get into this thing because he, I think it was back in either mid-July or early July, it was announced that he was going to be represented by Clutch Sports Agency. Rich Paul. Everybody knows this. And it wasn't that long ago when you looked at the Chris Livingston situation, freshman last year at Kentucky, didn't live up necessarily to 5-star expectations, and did, slid in the draft. And Chris Paul made some public comments, basically pointing a finger at Calipari, which speaking of Rich Paul, I find that rich given Calipari's track record. But, there's, I don't know that there was strong, hard accusations thrown, but close, about pointing the finger at the coach for the reason of the players. So one of the things I wanted to talk to someone that knew Chris Paul. So I reached out to him. I said, with Calipari now at Arkansas, that thing that just happened, is there any thought necessarily that there's going to be some friction there, and then players that he represents, there might be an issue there? And this person said, look, I don't know specifically to that moving forward, but he goes, I do think Rich will try to keep his players from going places that can't help them. I'm like, well, that should be any representation, should be looking out for their clients. But Calipari's track record is so good, and his brand building, not only for himself, but if you play for him, it gives you, to me, it gives you extra shine with the draft. We've seen it so many times. And that doesn't mean that 100 out of 100 players is going to have the same experience, but I don't think you hold that against him. I don't know what Rich Paul and Calipari's situation will be moving forward with players that Arkansas is recruiting that Rich Paul is representing, but we'll see moving forward. So I wanted to bring that, just a little bit more info relative to Caleb Wilson. So we'll keep an eye on that. There's some that think, could he be a package deal with the Boozer twins? They played late together at Knight Riders. I still lean toward Arkansas based on what I've been told by multiple people that Arkansas is in the lead there. But he's the other one I told you. I told you that Malik Thomas, when we were last on, already had his Arkansas visit date scheduled. I couldn't say what it was. It came out a couple of days later. Caleb Wilson also has a visit date scheduled. It's not public yet, but he's got one scheduled for Arkansas. Could that change? Possibly, but there's one that's thought to be set. So, we're looking ahead to October for that. But again, he's got visits set in September. Alabama and Kentucky, those visits can happen. He was recently on campus at USC. Caleb Wilson, the 6'9" forward, also top five-ish ranked 5-star. I think in the composite rankings, he's fourth. Acuff Jr. fourth, according to 247. When you look at the composite, Acuff is a top 10 guy anyway. Caleb Wilson, I think, is fourth in the composite, but he's everybody's top five-ish rated player. Again, a 6'9" combo forward out of the Atlanta area. And I continually say and bring up the fact that I think he's the best two-way player in the country in his class, and maybe overall when you look at all the classes, because he can be such a difference maker because of his versatility defensively. He's got good length. He's got a big motor. He gets a lot of steals and blocks. He just packs in playmaking on defense and changing possessions because of his ability to get deflections again. He's quick enough to get into passing lanes, quick hands, get deflections, get steals, and then he can, with his length, his height at 6'9", his timing and anticipation, does a good job of rim protection. And he's the kind of guy that offensively just continues to get better and better. Slasher above the rim guy, goes to the blue collar on the glass. Matter of fact, he was just the MVP of I think he was the MVP of the Slam All-Star game that was played in Rucker Park outdoors. A lot of Malik Thomas, and there's a lot of 5-star guys that were out there. And I think he got the MVP. I think he had a double-double in that game. When we look at Caleb Wilson again, visit date to Arkansas set. I can't wait till that goes public. And then we'll see, again, sometimes these things devolve. I just don't see that with him. I still think Arkansas leads there. Okay, another 5-star guy. Some ratings don't have him there. The composite rankings do. Kingston Flemings, 6'3" guard out of San Antonio. We talked about him last week. I'm just going to bring him up again because he's got Arkansas in his Final Five. Chuck Martin, Arkansas assistant coach, has been heavily involved there. And he's got several visits scheduled. I haven't seen one scheduled for Arkansas. I'm just told maybe Arkansas gets the last visit. It's interesting, along with Chris Sinak Jr., it was reported this week that he's going to visit Houston this weekend as well. So both guys, Sinak being close to Houston, where he's from, being that Baton Rouge, New Orleans area, somewhere in there. And then Flemings, San Antonio, they're not too far. But both are expected to visit Houston. What's interesting about Flemings is he's been in Hungary this week. I think he's still there for Team USA. It's the FIBA 3-on-3. We saw that 3-on-3 basketball. It's in the Olympics now. I'm still trying to get, my old playground days. We had all those 3-on-3 events. A lot of folks remember those. Hoop Fest here in Little Rock. So 3-on-3 basketball has been around for a while. Now, and it's Olympic sport, but he's on the Team USA under 18 3x3 national team, and they're competing in Hungary. I think yesterday they defeated Egypt. I don't know what's on the schedule, but it's already midweek Wednesday. I don't know when he's traveling back from Hungary, but reportedly has a visit scheduled this weekend to Houston. And so these are some of the guys mentioned: Koa Pete, Arizona State, Chris Sinak Jr., and Kingston Flemings looking to visit Houston this weekend. Flemings is interesting because he's a lead guard. There are some people that think, folks I talk to, that think he may be the best facilitator lead guard in this class. When you look at guys like Darius Acuff Jr. and some other ones that'll be primary handlers, they're maybe considered more score first with the ability to lead your team and also facilitate. He may be the one that people think is maybe facilitator first ready and help a team. But here's Arkansas's thinking on this. I have a source that tells me Calipari, because he's done this so many times, is not concerned about, trying to convince Acuff or Flemings why it would make sense both of those guys could play together. If you look at Arkansas's team this year, DJ Wagner, you recruited Boogie Flan with the idea that you were going to maybe have DJ Wagner back. Initially DJ Wagner was thought to be going to be a one and done. And I think Boogie Flan may have committed and even signed early. However, you still were recruiting DJ Wagner to come to Arkansas with you, and you convinced Boogie Flan to do that. Those guys are going to get plenty of time, both of them, will get plenty of time as lead guard for Arkansas. And one of the things you have to learn at some level is how to play with other high level guys that play your position. Because if you're going to be in the NBA and make that work, there's only a handful of true superstars, maybe 10 at a time, 5 to 10. Then there's all-star level guys. And then after that, you've got to figure out a way to make it work playing with guys as good as you, if not better. And so I think Calipari does a great job of convincing players to do that. Calipari and Arkansas are serious about Kingston Flemings. When I was on last week, I was skeptical and even said, hey, I'll come back and fill in more blanks here, but I'm skeptical that I don't know at this point how serious Arkansas is on that list because the visit date wasn't known yet. Some of the other ones have been released, still don't know a visit date. I'm told that he's likely to visit Arkansas, and Arkansas believes it makes sense to have a Flemings and an Acuff. It's not something that it's like a fleeting thing. Sometimes when you make these lists as a team, it's because you want it to look better. You've already down to 2 or 3 schools. You put out a list of 5, 6, 7, and you want it to look like Arkansas because they did recruit you maybe a little bit, that they're in the picture for you. And John Calipari is pursuing you, even if that's not necessarily true. In this case, I've now got more information to believe that this is a serious thing for Arkansas. So keep an eye on that. Isaiah Seeley, the 6'7" wing combo guard out of Springdale. I keep talking about him. Arkansas has been pursuing him. Calipari offered him, and there was talk. Seeley was in talks with associate head coach, I think it was Tim Coleman, a week or so ago, about coming in even this month in August after the dead period ended on the 21st, maybe getting in, just coming down for an unofficial visit initially. And so I checked on that a day or so ago. He hadn't been on campus yet. He had a visit scheduled that same September 13, 15 weekend for St. Louis, but he did tell me that may change and he may not go that weekend. He did not then follow up and say, because maybe I'm looking at coming on campus with those other guys to Arkansas, but we'll keep an eye on that. I don't close the door on that either. Isaiah Seeley, a top 50-ish rated 4-star player out of Springdale. I can tell you this, I do have some more information on him in terms of how Arkansas views this. Here are the things they like about Isaiah Seeley. One of them is they like his size and length, and they feel like he is a very unselfish player. They like it that he's skilled enough to score, but they really like the fact that he'll get off the ball, can play the 1, 2, or 3. So there's versatility, 6'7" length, good enough athleticism, but they like his unselfishness. And they saw him on that really competitive Team Thad team over the summer 17U on the Nike EYBL, and that team had Jasper Johnson, Cortland Mulder, another Springdale kid. Those guys were kind of wired to score. And they thought that Seeley did a great job playing with other good players. And he showed them something there and the ability to do that. So Calipari it was not an empty offer, a token offer to an in-state kid in this class. That's a guy, he said they're going to make offers to guys they think can help, that they'd like to get. And so keep an eye on it. But Arkansas does like Isaiah Seeley. For the things I just went through is what I was told is part of that calculation for him. So we kind of jumped around really in 2025. Someone asked, and some of the comments that popped up here, how do I think this lands for Arkansas? I still think Arkansas is in the lead for Caleb Wilson. I said that last week. I gave some glowing comments about Calipari from his camp. Today I kind of went to the Rich Paul thing to keep an eye on, something to kind of keep an eye on. The other thing being with Malik Thomas, I do think Arkansas is in the top 2 or 3 there. Arkansas, I have one source that thinks when all these visits play out, Arkansas has the inside track with Malik Thomas. There it is. I've got at least one source that think Arkansas is the leader. Some other people I talked to, not necessarily sources, but media people that cover it on a national level, think it's a toss-up, or thought it would, just as recently as last week, thought it was a toss-up between Arkansas and UConn. And now Alabama. Just keep an eye on that, because the Jasper Johnson thing, if indeed it ends up being Kentucky, Alabama, makes sense to me why Alabama is now got a visit scheduled with him when that wasn't, even though Alabama was in that final 7 list, we're not sure exactly how many visits Malik Thomas takes. He's going to visit Alabama later in September. Remember, Coa Pete has more visits. Duke, Baylor, The homeschool Arizona is going to get the last visit. And again, Arizona State this weekend. And then you've got, again, Caleb Wilson taking visits in September, but he's got one set up later for Arkansas unless that changes. And then Malik Thomas, let's see if he takes more visits outside of what we've seen in September. My guess is he probably does. Kansas State's been after him. That may be another one where he decides to visit. He's already visited Auburn. That's on his final 7. Again, the UConn visit, we know about that. So to me, outside of Acuff, Malik Thomas and Caleb Wilson are the ones I kind of gravitate toward really being in a position of confidence to say Arkansas either leads or is right there, if not the leader. Then you move beyond that, and I'd say co-opete again. I'd say give advantage to Arizona there, but it's John Calipari. They're coming on campus. He's not messing around. Chris Sinek Jr., there's a little waffling on, is that the same date he's actually going to visit? Until I hear otherwise, that's the source information I have. It's a reliable source. And some of these other national guys now that he won't deny the visit, they're starting to think that probably is when he's going to visit. I'm just telling you what they're telling me, but we'll see. We'll see if that actually happens. But again, I think LSU, Kentucky's visiting Houston this weekend with him. Flemings, I think it's too soon for me to make any projections there. I'm just trying to give you the Arkansas perspective that Arkansas is very serious about that recruitment. It's not a situation where they recruited him for a while, they got Acuff, and he still has Arkansas on the list. That was kind of what happened with Malachi Marino and a Jasper Johnson. Those guys, there was never any serious traction about either one of those Kentucky natives taking a visit at Arkansas. They were recruited by Calipari when he was at Kentucky, in-state guys worthy of playing at Kentucky. But remember, these lists, sometimes they mean less, sometimes they mean more. What the telltale sign with Calipari is, where's the steam coming on actual visits? We got a lot here. Some of them have gone public now. I told you guys for a while, don't be surprised if there are multiple visitors on that mid-September weekend. Now we've got multiple. We got at least 2. I think 3 with Snack Jr. We'll see if that changes. I repeated a lot of that just to sew it up. Wanted to kind of get through that. 37 minutes in, I spent a lot of time on it. Thank you for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. Let's jump into just a little, I'm going to call it housekeeping, mailbag kind of stuff. Not that anybody's asked me about it, but probably a little bit topical. Some of it's fringe stuff, not that big of a deal. Casimir Cash Chavis, the final piece to Arkansas's roster, 15 players when you count it all up. 9 that are those top rotation, true NIL. When you look at the top 9 players, the guys that factor into the players that Calipari's really looking to use and have roles this season. But Chavis will be a freshman top 50 guy, top 150, 3-star player that was originally signed with Washington, got out of that. But going back to him, he was the last guy that was actually publicly announced was on scholarship and was officially part of the program. It was after the limited summer work. Arkansas's back to school, back to practice. He's there. So I can just report today that he's in practice like you would expect, but I've confirmed that. But also, he was the last guy to get a jersey number. He'll wear number 5. Near and dear to me, William Mills, tragic ending to his life, tragic story. One of the most talented players, arguably the most talented player to ever wear a Razorback uniform. Played for Eddie Sutton and then Nolan Richardson in the first year of Nolan back in the mid-'80s. Maybe the most gifted player ever at Arkansas. 6'5", athletic. You could give him the ball and let him run your offense. He was a very good passer. Just a physical, athletic freak. There were comparisons with him and Michael Jordan. Huge differences between the ears with those guys in terms of maturation, but in terms of physical gifts, it wasn't a bad comparison. But William Mills wore number 5, and so that's always near and dear to me. Cash Chavis will wear that. Joe Lenardi put his bracketology out yesterday, updated bracketology. People were like, what does that matter? Well, it matters. This stuff, you're looking at the way rosters are constructed. Now you're starting to see schedule news come out, when teams are going to play each other, how they're going to match up. The SEC, according to Lenardi in this bracketology, before we ever see any basketball, but it's interesting. I think it's telling about the perception of the league from a guy who's one of the best in the bracketology business. 10 SEC teams he's projected to the NCAA tournament. The only other conference that's comparable is the Big 12. He also projects 10 teams there. The other leagues less. Well, I think the Big 12's been consistently the best basketball conference for typically, consistently, not every year, but the best one in college basketball. So that's saying a lot to project each league with 10 teams. Also, Arkansas is a 5 seed. If you take that out, if you take it into how that would reflect a poll ranking, not that it would be apples to apples exactly, but if you're a projected 5 seed, that means typically an equivalent poll ranking, national poll ranking, of a range of 17 to 20. I've said, based on what I see here, what the SEC looks like to me when I look around college basketball, Arkansas for me would slot 10 to 15 nationally. But based on that seeding projection, it kind of telegraphs the idea that based on that, Arkansas would be somewhere in the 17 to 20 range. Doesn't matter. It's just stuff to talk about here in August as we get in to start the football season. But it was interesting. 10 teams. He's got Alabama projected as a 1 seed. No shock there. Alabama's going to have plenty of national number one preseason rankings. I've talked about that for a while. They're going to be everyone's pick to win the SEC. Mark Sears is back. Grant Nelson. They recruited some 5-star McDonald's All-Americans. Cliff Omarui from Rutgers, the big man. That's a squad. Reitzel, the wing guards back. I mean, they've got some good players, and I understand that. Bama's a 1 seed, then multiple others. So we got 10 teams. Arkansas is a 5, Bama as a 1, Auburn as a 2. So the two Alabama schools known for maybe arguably the best football rivalry in college football. Speaking of entering football season now, the top 2 projected teams according to Lenardi, when you look at the seeding, Alabama, then Auburn. Auburn's got Janai Broome and Chris Moore, the West Memphis native. He's still playing basketball. Same 2020 class as Devo Davis, who's now at Oklahoma State. So those guys are, clinging to that. They got NIL money and they're clinging to those college careers. But I understand why Auburn would be projected that high, because I had Auburn in my top 3, which I haven't put out yet, my power rankings, but I definitely have Auburn in my top 3. But then you move ahead, you've got Tennessee projected as a 4 seed, Texas projected as a 4 seed. Now, I like some of the player pieces that Texas has. I mentioned this last time when we were on, we went through that 18-game SEC schedule, and Arkansas gets Texas twice, home and away. I'm not convinced that of Texas's basketball culture. I never have been. They've had some good teams, but also the coaching staff and how some of these pieces are going to come together. So that's pretty strong. And we'll see. It may play out that Texas is that good, and Arkansas gets to play them twice. So it's definitely going to help your resume. You're going to have tons of quad 1 win opportunities. Texas may be a quad 1 win opportunity both home and away. But Texas is a 4 seed, Arkansas 5. There was another 5 seed projection. I'm trying to remember who it was out of these 10 SEC teams. Texas A&M. The Aggies are another team that got everybody back. A team that team seems like it's been together forever. A&M is a 5 seed. Kentucky was projected. Mark Pope, his first season, projected a 6 seed. I think Mississippi State was also projected as a 6 seed. Arkansas closes the regular season March 8th, right before the SEC tournament, at home against Mississippi State. And then you had Ole Miss was projected as a 9 seed. And another team was as well. I left somebody out. Florida was a 9 seed. So just going through it in order of seeding, it was Alabama, Auburn, Tennessee, Texas, Arkansas, Texas A&M, Mississippi State, Kentucky, Florida, and Ole Miss. That's 10 teams. So pretty strong. The 6 teams that are left out, it'd be easier just to go through those, right? South Carolina, Georgia, Vanderbilt, LSU, Missouri, and Oklahoma, the new SEC team. Arkansas gets Oklahoma at home, by the way. And part of that first early 7-game stretch where I think Arkansas could actually start strong from once 6-1 or 5-2. The other news that came out really was the Arkansas-Baylor matchup. And I want to talk about non-conference a little bit. First of all, I go way back. I'm an old guy, so I'm old school. And I go back to when Sidney Moncrief in the Southwest Conference in Arkansas beat Baylor The first Baylor matchup I remember, Arkansas defeated Baylor with Vinnie Johnson, the microwave. Big time NBA player. We know Moncrief was Naismith Hall of Famer, multiple all-time All-Pro, multiple time All-Star, two-time Defensive Player of the Year. But Vinnie Johnson was Sixth Man of the Year in the NBA. Played with those bad boy Detroit Pistons. Won a couple of NBA titles in Detroit. And was one of the top 6 men coming off the bench, a guard. They called him the microwave because he came in and immediately started getting buckets. But Terry Teagle was another very talented Baylor Bear. I never forgot that name. That also, I think he was a freshman the year that Moncrief was a senior. Arkansas defeated Baylor in Fayetteville, and Vinnie Johnson. But Terry Teagle, as a freshman, had a really good game. And I think he scored 36 points against Arkansas a few years later, but one of the top players in the old Southwest Conference. So that series, for me, Arkansas's won nearly 100 games in the series, dominant, like 96 to 40 something, dominant. But when you look at Arkansas moving to the SEC in 91, 92, I think the teams have met 4 times out of conference as opposing, in different conferences. And I think Baylor's 3-1 or 4-1 in the matchup since Arkansas has been out of the SEC. We know in recent years, Baylor has beaten Arkansas in that Elite Eight, the biggest game ever. Baylor was on a mission, defeated every team by double digits. I think Arkansas played within 9 points, the closest margin Baylor faced. J.D. Notae fouled out fairly early in the second half in a game where Arkansas was competitive, and that changed the complexion for Arkansas. But it was a Baylor Bears team on a mission, won the national title in Arkansas's first Elite Eight run 4 seasons ago. Then you had the matchup 2 years ago in the final Big 12 SEC Challenge, played in Waco. I think Baylor won by 2 or 3. I mean, it went down to the wire. And so Arkansas is looking to, get back in the winning ledger against Baylor after all that history and all those games over the years. And we talked about this. Arkansas, we knew about the 2 non-conference matchups against Big Ten schools, Illinois on Thanksgiving Day in Kansas City. We knew about Michigan at Madison Square Garden in New York City in the Jimmy V Classic. And so those are neutral site games on their own right. Arkansas's got the road game at Miami in the second ever ACC SEC Challenge, but that's an ACC team. So you had 2 Big Tens, an ACC. Calipari had been talking about a neutral site game in Dallas. And so you're thinking, okay, regional game, let's hook up against one of those Big 12 teams, right? We just talked about it. Lenardi says these are the 2 best leagues in the country because he's projected 10 from each in the tournament. We knew that made a lot of sense. And so, I was hoping it would be a Houston or Kansas or Baylor. Those have been really the top 3 consistent programs in the best basketball league. I said it consistently. And then you've brought in Arizona as well now for that league, another really big time basketball program. So getting Baylor checks that box. It's one of the top 3 or 4 programs in the league. When you count Arizona, nothing wrong with that. It gives Arkansas a 3rd game against Baylor. When you count this coming season in the last 5, and again, Arkansas has lost the previous 2. So you want to get back on the winning side with Baylor. But here's what I like about this. November 9th in Dallas at American Airlines Arena, that's the first week. That's the opening week of college basketball. November 4th is a Monday. The 9th is a Saturday. The 4th, either Arkansas is going to play on opening day, I believe, or the day after, the 5th. But they'll have at least one game, in my opinion. We haven't seen the non-conference schedule yet. We know about 11 of the matchups with only 2 more to know. But one of the 11, we don't know the playing date yet. That's Pacific. So where there's 3 playing dates, we don't know. But I suspect Arkansas opens on the 4th. If not the 4th, a day later on the 5th. That's usually how it works as a lead up to that Saturday game against Baylor. You're going to get tested early on a neutral site, but you're certainly getting a quad 1 win opportunity in your first week of the season. And I've heard a lot of people talking about, Arkansas' schedule and how they really think this is an aggressive non-conference schedule. Well, it's a good one. I just went through those marquee matchups. Arkansas's got several mid-majors, a couple of in-state D1s in Little Rock and Central Arkansas. You've got the Oakland game to close out non-conference schedule in terms of the lead up to SEC play against Oakland, a team that knocked Kentucky out of the tournament last year. So even in some of your games you wouldn't call marquee in terms of a national perspective, there's still some storylines and things that matter around here in some of these games. However, people are really giving a thumbs up to the aggressive scheduling. Baylor and Dallas, Michigan and Illinois at neutral sites, and then you don't really schedule the ACC SEC Challenge. It's scheduled for you. All the league teams playing it, and Arkansas goes on the road this year. It alternates. Last year, Arkansas hosted Duke under the previous coaching regime. But here are a couple of things. One is, I didn't think Eric Melsman necessarily scheduled that aggressively in non-conference. I talked about it before. However, if you look at the last two teams he had, last two seasons, his teams played 5 marquee games. Arkansas is still at 4. I just went through them. His teams played 5. That was by a process of playing in both the Maui Invitational 2 years ago and the Battle for Atlantis last year. Then you had the Oklahoma matchup on a neutral site. That was a non-conference game. OU just joined the SEC in Tulsa in December both years. So that's 4th. 3 games in 3 days in those 2 tournaments. 4th marquee matchup against OU. And then 2 years ago, you had Baylor on the road. I mentioned that in the final Big 12 SEC Challenge. That was played in late January. So it was a true road game, but you did not get it as a lead up to conference play. You'd already played basically half your conference games by the time you played it. And then last year, you hosted Duke, but you got a marquee game. It was a big one, Arkansas's best win of the season. So each of the last 2 years, Arkansas played 5 marquee matchups. Right now we're at 4. So I do like the scheduling. I do like the way Calipari does it. He's not in these tournament formats where you're playing multiple games in back-to-back-to-back days, and then you're not sure that you're going to get the best game because it's a tournament format. Someone loses, gets upset. We've seen that before, and you play somebody else. Some of those tournament matchups, Arkansas was playing Louisville. When you go back to Maui, a bad Louisville team, in most years, you'd look forward to that game. By doing it the way Calipari does it, he guarantees he's going to get a marquee matchup because it's a one-off. Even the Illinois game that's part of a 4-team, multi-team event, it's still that Arkansas-Illinois game is the whole thing. Scheduling those other teams and calling it an event. It's not a tournament. The games are spread out over a week's period of time going into feast week, but it allows you to get that extra non-conference game by doing it that way. Still, I like that. But he has mentioned outside of the Dallas game that we've been heard about, and then we finally got the matchup that it was leading to. He still has mentioned the possibility or the potential that they were working on a home and home is what they call it now. I call it home and away. And why that's significant is I think Arkansas is still trying to get to that 5th marquee game. If you look at the scheduling at Kentucky, I don't remember the Wildcats ever having fewer than 5 marquee games in a non-conference slate. I still think there's something there. Who could that be, and when might that be played? I mentioned the last time we were on, because we know of 5 games scheduled in December. Typically, that's the most Arkansas plays in December. It's the same amount of games Kentucky played last year in December. And the way that the dates we know about now for those 5 December games are spaced almost identically to how they've been in the past. However, this Baylor game, because they were trying to make this work, they actually looked at a mid-December date for that game. In the middle of those, typically Arkansas takes a week off from a Saturday game. Usually it was Oklahoma and Tulsa, and then the following Saturday they'd play in North Little Rock later in December. This year they're playing in North Little Rock against UCA in mid-December, but they've got a game scheduled the following weekend in Fayetteville against North Carolina A&T. But usually that week in between is off. Well, they considered scheduling Baylor in there and would have had a 6th game in December had that played out. But no, that's going to be November 9th. But if you're going to have a home and away with another maybe marquee team, are you still trying to figure out, can you squeeze that into that mid-December? You've got plenty of dates in November leading up. Remember, Arkansas, now Baylor on November 9th. Arkansas plays Troy in Bud Walton Arena. I broke that news about that game about a month ago. That'll be November 13th. And then you have 9 days, November 22nd, till the next game that we know about on the schedule, Little Rock on the 22nd. So I'm kind of jumping all around to get to the point of I think Arkansas's got multiple opportunities, either in November, potentially in that mid-December part where they were considering scheduling that Baylor game. And then there's still there's a midweek off date in the SEC play. You've got Oklahoma on January 25th at Bud Walton Arena. Then that's a Saturday, and then you're off until the next Saturday in terms of no games in the midweek in league play. That's your bye until you play at Kentucky. And I mentioned last time, last year when Kentucky played Gonzaga in February 10th, scheduled a non-conference game. It was a home and away. Kentucky hosted. And the away game, presumably, I don't remember if it was the year before, if it's going to be this year. I haven't looked at Kentucky's non-con. But either way, it was a Saturday. This time, if you do that, it's going to be a midweek, Tuesday or Wednesday, likely. So I don't know if they'd be willing to do that. But it may be when you have to schedule something like that. So then it comes down to, we know Pacific is going to be on the schedule. We don't know a date. Maybe that'll be the first game, November 4th or November 5th. Maybe somewhere between the 13th and the 22nd. I mentioned that 9-day gap. And then you've got 2 more games to learn about and dates. Who will those be? Again, I think one of them could be another marquee type of game. Maybe not. Maybe they stick with 4 this year. But that would be unprecedented for Calipari, and it would be new around here, at least going back 3 seasons. And then, when could you squeeze in a game? And here's what I would like to see. When I look at this opportunity, if there's something like that brewing, Calipari talked about it. One of the names that was thrown around is, why not Memphis? Why not play Memphis, schedule home and away? But Memphis, I think, has already put out its schedule. But the other thing is, here's an opportunity. We know the ACC SEC Challenge is going to alternate every year. You're going to have a home game one year, a road game the next. So what you could do is, in the years where you had a home game like Duke last year, you could schedule these two off, home and aways, and make sure that the year that you're going to host the ACC SEC Challenge, that you still get a road game in November or December as part of a home and away. This year, Arkansas is away at Miami. So the idea is, let's try to get a marquee game at Bud Walton Arena for home and a 2 off, home and away. And then next year, you'll be the away team against whoever you schedule. And that year, you just happen to be hosting the SEC ACC Challenge. So this way, you always get at least a road game in your lead up to conference play. You get one, not just neutral sites. Those are great too. You're playing away from home. It's not the same as playing just, loading up on home games, but a true road game. And so that would be a way to do it. I'm going to tell you the one team I'd like to see, if they're working on a marquee matchup, I'm going to tell you who I hope it is. I hope it's Southern California. I hope Calipari and Musselman are talking about Arkansas and USC playing home and away. And I don't know. I haven't seen where USC's put out its full non-conference schedule. Maybe it hasn't. I missed it. That would be the one I'd like to see. There's some other ones out there that would be great, but how cool would that be? You add another storyline. The SEC skip the opportunity to let Arkansas and Kentucky play home and away, and make that a thing every year. I just think that's wild. I think it should be every year. Calipari's going to go to Rupp, but how cool would it be to then in your own control in the non-conference schedule, build a marquee game and get Musselman back in Bud Walton Arena this year, and bring in Southern California in year 1 for him, and year 1 for John Calipari at Arkansas. I'm not saying that's where it's headed. That's just kind of a thought that I would like. I mentioned Lenardi and his bracketology. Some of the things I left out, College Basketball Report put out a little tweet. It was really cool. They had to do a lot of research on this. The teams in college basketball with the best records over the last 10 years. You add up all the wins of the last 10 years. Kentucky was number 1 in the SEC. And I think Kentucky overall in college basketball was like 6th or 7th, landed in the overall, but number 1 in the SEC. Arkansas was 2nd. When you look at the last 10 years, 5 with Mike Anderson, and then the last 5 with Eric Patrick Musselman, Arkansas was 2nd among SEC schools, but only 27th on the list. In that 10-year span, Arkansas had a rough season in 2015-16. They were an NIT team in 2018-19, Mike Anderson's last season. So no 21 seasons there. The other 3 in this grouping, 23, 25, 27 wins under Mike Anderson. And then you look at Eric Patrick Musselman. Arkansas did get to 20 wins in his first season, but 20-12. And then in his last season, a losing record. But 3 really good seasons there, Elite Eight, and Sweet 16. You don't do that unless you're racking up wins. And so, you can point to 3 or 4 seasons that were rough in that 10-year stretch, but Arkansas did enough work in some really good seasons by both coaches. Musselman's seasons were better. They certainly ended better. But it's a pretty, it's something to talk about, something that was put out this week. I thought was interesting. It was put out last month, and I just retweeted it this week. And transfer portal for playing time. is a Twitter account that put out the top 10 instant impact transfers. And I've seen so many lists where they're mentioning guys like Nelly Davis and Jonas Adu, even Adu Thiero as top transfers in basketball on some of these lists they put out. But this top 10 list didn't include any of those guys. It was DJ Wagner that was on this top 10 list. So good for DJ to get some love from one of these reporting places talking about transfer portal for playing time as a top 10 instant impact player, DJ Wagner, Arkansas transfer guard from Kentucky. Remember, there's close to 2,000 transfers in the portal. And it was either 247 or On3 that had all 5 of Arkansas's portal guys, 3 from Kentucky, DJ Wagner, Big Z, and Adu Thiero. And then Nelly Davis and Jonas Adu were typically ranked top 10-ish. Davis, arguably the number 1 transfer. But if you took all 5 of them, I think either On3 or 2471 or both had all 5 of Arkansas's transfers ranked in the top 30. Nobody was lower than 30. And you have 2,000. So it's a strong class. You can cherry pick, I guess, guys that you want to put on a list, but all of them check a box and you have a good case for it. I thought that was interesting. And I'm going to leave with a couple of things here. I talked to somebody about Cal's offense. Cal's offense last year was rated seventh when you look at Ken Palm's ratings at Kentucky. We knew they were an elite offensive team. The defense, not so much, 109th in Ken Palm. But over the years, and I've said this on here when Arkansas hired him, I bring it up all the time, the things that have always impressed me about Calipari's teams, other than the recruiting that's better than everybody else's. So they always, they say it's about the Jimmys and Joes, less about the X's and O's. It's not always quite that simple, but it's a great way to start. But the things that always stood out about to me in his recruiting is all the length, athleticism, size, and how it translated not only to rebounding, especially offensive rebounding. His best teams seem to be superior in that area, but how good his teams are in transition. I always thought his best teams that always stood out to me, they scored got a lot of easy scores. And when I listened to Calipari talk in his post-summer recap, limited summer workouts, we had that press conference, went up to Fayetteville, and he was talking about teaching guys how to run, and even mentioned Jonas Adu needing to work on footwork and playing at the pace they want to play, and talked about running. And I started thinking about my impressions of his teams. I can talk about their offense in basic terms, a dribble drive motion offense, but I really always go back to how good his teams have been in transition when he's really good. Last year's team was good at all of it for the most part, transition included. But I talked to somebody close to Calipari's process, and it's a four-prong approach. Number 1 is transition. The second part of that is secondary transition. So transition is fast break, get out and get to the basket, get a numbers advantage. Secondary transition is just having a plan to get the ball across midcourt quickly, and you may not have a break advantage, but you may likely have a defense that's not in position, and is not, you still, even if all 5 defenders are past midcourt, they may not be in a position. You have attack opportunities, angles, and you work on that stuff. So transition and secondary transition are the front runners in terms of Calipari's offense. It starts with those things, and then you get into that dribble drive motion offense with hopefully an early quick hitting set. So it's very interesting. It makes sense to me when I hear these things, because I go back to my impressions of watching those teams, covering those teams, seeing them on television, but also in person when I covered them when they come to Fayetteville and play Arkansas Bud Walton Arena, and how some of those games really it came down to Kentucky was just got more easy scores in close games because they were able to run off misses, off makes. They found opportunities to do that. So it's interesting to me. That's going to be a big part of it. I've talked about potential weaknesses. I'm going to just jump to that real quick. Again, some of it's been my question marks about three-point shooting. The other part was the frontline depth. I'm told this staff is not concerned about frontline depth at all. And I guess that makes sense by the way they recruited the guys 10 through 14, or, there's some true walk-ons in there. You've got some guys that are, they're not in the top 9, but they're all backcourt guys. So apparently they feel really good about the front court. And I thought you're an injury away or foul trouble away from really having to change who you are, whether it's mid-game or for a stretch of games. And I don't think this staff is worried about that. I think they recruited precisely to how they think it's going to work. So that means if you do have foul trouble or an injury in that, what I consider a thin front line, I mean, it's Jonas Adu, Big Z, and Trevor Brazil, and then you've got, as a 3-4 combo, Adu Thiero, so he can help you there. I think if any of those attrition issues play out, they're confident about going to a smaller ball and a smaller way to play. And I think there are some guys that would be more traditional wings that might have to play, like we saw with some of Eric Musselman teams, and he talked about it when they lacked size, and several of his teams did outside of maybe one guy. It seemed like the first 3 years, if it not for Jalen Williams, you were undersized. But he had guys that could play that small ball forward. Justin Smith was one of them. Adriel Bailey was a 5 in year 1. And there are a lot of guys that, you had Odis Tony slotting in as sometimes guarding a team's 4. Stanley Amude. So you had different guys doing that. At times, Mason Jones and Moses Moody did that. So I think Calipari has got pieces when you look at guys like Carter Knox, who I see as a wing and potentially some at the 2, even Billy Richmond, guys that are going to maybe in a smaller lineup. There may be matchups, even if everybody's healthy, where they go to some of that. But I think Arkansas staff, the more I dig into this, is pleased with where they're at. And you would hope that's the case, because with opportunities just to add one frontline piece of depth and those back 4 or 5 players they added, just to have it in case of some of this stuff. Again, you could say, well, they need them for practice. Yeah, that's true too. But even more importantly, I think I thought you needed a little more depth in your front line going into the season with all the things that can happen. But apparently they don't. And if they're going to be versatile enough to go smaller and play that way, maybe not be an issue at all. So I wanted to touch on that. All right, an hour and 6 minutes in, my initial thought, 45 or 50 minutes, I blew it out of the water. I like to talk. Thank you for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. We're waiting for Arkansas to drop a final schedule, get all these non-conference games announced. I mentioned I think there could still be an attempt to get a marquee game home and away. We'll see if they're able to do that. Maybe it's just not in the cards this year, and they finish things up with a couple of more mid-major type of games. We're still waiting to see when Tyler Ulis is going to be announced as part of this staff to round out that assistant coaching staff. I think that's probably the final move, is to either get him or figure it out if he's not going to make it. And then, aside from that, we're just going to continue to keep tabs on this recruiting. I think it's a really big deal. One thing I left out, I looked right over it, is jumping to 2026. I'm trying to sign off and I just caught it. My horrible handwriting. J.J. Andrews, the 6'7" wing at a Little Rock Christian Academy. Great run at Nike Peach Jam on the E16 part of it. Really showed out at the Formula Zero, Dame Lillard's elite camp just a weekend or 2 ago. Got an award out there. We've talked about some of that. But national top 15 rated 5-star according to ESPN. He is going to take a visit to Arkansas in October, mid-October. So he's got a visit scheduled for Missouri in September. He'll be at Arkansas the weekend that Arkansas hosts LSU in basketball. So that's mid-October. Arkansas has a bye week. They have a home game against, I think, Ole Miss in early October. Is that right? Is it Ole Miss? And then Arkansas has LSU in mid-October. I may have October 5 is Tennessee. Then Arkansas mid-October has LSU. So it's that weekend. I don't have the dates. I didn't write them down right in front of me. But Missouri in September, Arkansas October, and then he's going to visit LSU in November, early November. So maybe he's going to go to a basketball game while he's there. But that's news on J.J. Andrews. And then Aiden Chronister, national top 50 player out of Rogers, is going to be at Sunrise Christian Academy. Talked to someone in his camp yesterday, and they're in constant contact with the staff, and they're trying to set up and align, it was the word used, aligning dates for him to come and visit in the fall. 6'7" sharpshooter. J.J. Andrews, very athletic, just a beast. I mean, guys can go out and get you double just about every night. Does just about everything right. Aiden Chronister needs to get stronger, add some weight. But he's on a visit tour himself. This weekend, he'll be at Michigan. The following weekend, Indiana. All right, now I really am wrapping it up. Thank you for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. Until next time, we'll see you then.